Hey, everybody.
Welcome, everybody. We are doing a pre-record for a Thursday night show because we will be with Todd Michael Harris and David Steffen
That's right.
at the premiere in Cabin for the People versus David and Colette Steffen, a movie
Right.
that I hope you all have seen when it was in your neighborhood.
Right. We will be interviewing while they're here as well, so stay tuned for that. It has been over a year. I think it was April of last year
I think so.
when we interviewed James Roguski, and he's just the one-man Don Quixote taking down the World Health Organization windmills. I don't think there's anybody on the planet who's done as much research and effort in getting the word out on what they're trying to do. And it's super important, and we haven't checked in a while. So we thought we would bring James back on and get an update from the last time, because it's been a series of one step forward, 4 steps back. So we'll let James explain that. So James, come on down.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. It's been a while, and I got to live on this planet too, and so they're trying to make a bigger mess of it than they already have. So I find myself in the WHO rabbit hole. I really want to get out of the WHO and on with the new, but they just keep going. They are like the Energizer Bunny. They're running a marathon. And so where would you like to start? There's a world of things to talk about.
Well, when we first talked to you, the WHO pandemic treaty was sort of like first on the table. It was just hitting the radars. And then we were all attacking the WHO at that point. And I think we changed directory at some point. We realized it's not really the WHO, it's the countries that have to sign on to this treaty. And so your kind of journey is morphed as they morph. And so let's just sort of, I don't know. I think the best place to start is with the new amendment, the IHR amendments, and work backward if we have to from there.
Basically, I guess I'll start with what the heck just happened.
Yes, because everybody was celebrating, going, yes, it was defeated. And then a couple days later, it was like, oh, no, it wasn't. And so many people I talked to, even last weekend at the Reawaken tour, people were saying, oh, yeah, we beat the WHO. And I'm like, no, we didn't. And they were shocked because they had not heard the June 1st announcement that they accepted the amendments.
It's astonishing, but here's what happened. Okay, I'll try to condense this as short as possible. There's actually a third agreement, and boy, I bet very few people have heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sticking points in the negotiations had to do with intellectual property, and I think the problem and why everybody's confused is the reason why these negotiations were even happening is not what people have been saying, but if you actually were, watching and paying attention and listening, they kept saying that this was about equity. Mm-hmm. Well, equity is money. If you buy a home, you've got a mortgage, you pay down some of the mortgage, you fix up the house, it goes up in value, time goes by. At some point you go, oh, look, I got equity in my home. It's money, right? Cash out, you'd have money in your hand. If you buy stocks, you get into the equities markets. You have an equity stake in a corporation that you bought the stock. So even though everyone has been saying in these negotiations that they want equity or they want to operationalize equity. There's a phrase for you. What the heck is operationalizing equity?
Yes.
And they want to have equitable access to pandemic-related products. Well, there were really two things driving this, and I've been using this word more than I care to, but I'm going to do it again because it seems to get the point across. For the sake of the next couple of minutes in this conversation, pretend that you're a normie, that you're drinking the official Kool-Aid, and the narrative that is out there is something that you've accepted. And then teleport yourself back in time to 2021. In 2021, they released the jabs, and the idea was, the accepted idea, the normie idea was, oh, everybody's got to get jabbed, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jabs, and everything will just go back to normal.
Right.
Nations like Canada ordered 400 million jabs for 40 million people.
Mm-hmm.
Should have been a clue that that's not really a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's an ongoing manipulation of your immune system to some
Yes.
end. Okay. Well, a lot of the nations were upset that they could not get the jabs. There wasn't enough to go around. And
Mhm.
so in December of 2021, they had a special session of the World Health Assembly, and it was the nations who felt shortchanged. You know, the US like cornered the market on remdesivir,
Mhm.
Yes.
right? Why anybody would want that, I have no idea. But again, we're not challenging the narrative, we're accepting it for sake of conversation.
Mhm.
So the nations said to the WHO, well, you know, you are the forum for nations to come together and discuss health related issues, oversee negotiations that will result in equitable access to pandemic related products.
Mhm.
Right.
This was never a WHO attempt at a coup to take over the world.
Mhm.
This was not an attack on national sovereignty. If you actually look at what is in the documents, in many ways, it's a perverse expression of national sovereignty, saying, hey, you know, you guys are hogging up all this good stuff. We're not getting our fair share. And so, what the nations submitted, very specifically Bangladesh and the African nations, they submitted proposed amendments that would set up an allocation mechanism. They wanted to settle this trade dispute in a way that I think is analogous. If you've heard the story, if a man is hungry and you give him a fish, you feed him for a day. But
Mhm.
if you teach him how to fish, then he's good for a while. Well, the nations suggested setting up the director general as sort of the center of if they got alerted that there was some problem somewhere in the world and something was needed by the nation that was having the problem, they wanted the director general to say to, you know, I'll pick on the United States. Oh, you can manufacture something that's needed there. So manufacture it and give it to them.
Right.
Feed them for a day. Give, you know, they need some drugs, they need some jabs, they need some tests, they need some masks or other PPE. We
Mhm.
need it here, get it to them. Okay. Well, interestingly, there was a 97-page report published on February 6th of 2023. It was publicly presented on February 20th of 2023, and not too many people seemed to pay it any attention. Tedros had a select group, a committee put together, the International Health Regulations Review Committee, and in October, November, December of 2022 and January and February of 2023, they reviewed the proposed amendments from all of the nations. And I have to admit, I was pleasantly surprised when they published their review paper. And I agreed with a lot of the things that they had to say.
Okay.
And one of the things that they said was, well, you know, the WHO doesn't really have the authority to go bossing nations around saying, you got to make this and give it to them. Y'all got to go back to the drawing board and come up with a better idea. I caught myself. I wanted to curse right now because darn it, they came up with, from their point of view, a better idea.
Mhm.
Instead of just getting what they need when they need it, they ended up settling in on not an allocation mechanism, but a coordinating financial mechanism. They they agreed on June 1st to have financing be arranged by the WHO to build out the big pharma industry for drugs and jabs and tests and masks and things like that, so that investment would flow on a geographically distributed basis to nations who really can't afford big pharma's products.
Right.
So what happened here is even worse, in my view, than what they originally asked for. They asked to receive, you know, something that they needed when they needed it. Give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. And they got promises for investment in factories to manufacture an unlimited supply of whatever it is they think they need. Now, my take on it is um, colored by the fact that 2 years ago, they started using a term that I had to look up. And that term is global public good.
Yes.
Now, those words, sound good because it has the word good in it.
Yeah.
Now, the definition of a global public good seems almost ridiculous. It's something that is available in infinite supply. Once you start thinking about it, you might come up with sunlight. Okay?
Right.
If I want to get some vitamin D, I could go soak up some sun in a reasonable way, get all the sun I want. It doesn't mean I'm using up your sun. You can go get some sunshine if you want. Air that you breathe, I could hyperventilate, and it's not going to mean that you don't get your oxygen that you need. This video and any kind of digital product or a book in the library, right? If you read a book, you don't like scrape the words off the page and then the next person can't read it.
Right.
Okay? If somebody watches this video, they can watch it 5 times. That doesn't mean 5 people aren't going to get a chance to watch it. So they wanted, and they want, and they just said it the other day at a meeting that I recorded and published. They want pandemic-related products to be global public goods. An infinite amount of jabs and drugs and tests and masks. So if a nation wants, people want some jabs, how many would you like? Just run them off the factory. And so they learned something different. They, I learned an acronym for they. Everybody always says they, right? Well, they, THEY, is the hierarchy enslaving you. And so
I like it.
what they want and what they seem to believe is that the way to prevent, prepare for, and respond to some type of potential pandemic is to go looking for pathogens that aren't bothering anybody.
Right.
Go, look through poultry farms or dairy farms or penguins in Antarctica or, some woolly mammoth that melted out of the tundra, up north or wherever they might find it in sewage systems or, your veterinarian's office when you bring a stool sample for your pet or whatever people had stuck up their nose. You got to ask yourself, where did all those swabs go? And what did they do with all that information?
Right.
They want what they had been referring to as the One Health approach. Then it was One Health surveillance. And in the amendments, it very subtly got changed to prevention surveillance.
Right. I noticed that, so you've done everybody a service. I don't know if you know this, but we went through all the Pfizer contracts that were redacted and we took them from all over the world and put them back together and unredacted them basically.
Yep.
And you've done a lot of that work. And this is what I appreciate about you. You don't just go on and spew opinions. You actually bring up their amendments. We've done this countless times, just going back to the World Health or the World Population Conference back in 1954. And you have to do that. So you've done this international health regulations, and then you put in bold all the changes that they made, and it made it really easy to pick out. They put in a lot about preparedness in there. They added all this preparedness and prevention and things that aren't even on the horizon. And they made a big deal about adding all of this stuff that isn't even a thing yet. So
and so it helps to understand what the international health regulations are and what they were and what they have now been amended to be. Okay.
Right.
And so originally, if you can imagine, they used to have an interesting document in the 1969 version. Think about cargo ships, maybe shipping grain or something like that. You don't want to have, rats or other animals or, even, the fleas on the rats or ticks or mosquitoes or fruit flies or something like that. There can be an invasive species that invades another country, because it hops off a cargo ship and takes over. And so they used to have a de-ratting protocol, and there was a form for it. I was like, oh man, we got to use this and apply it to WHO headquarters and get all the rats.
Yeah.
But the point behind that is what they saw as a problem was normally handled at the port of entry. Okay.
Right.
If someone was ill, if they had plague or smallpox or whatever, or more importantly, rats and vermin and things on the cargo, that there would be a port authority that would deal with making sure that those kinds of things were not transmitted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in 2005, they said, yeah, that's one thing, but we can go deeper. And in 2005, they had every nation set up what they call an IHR, International Health Regulations, IHR focal point, which is an office that every nation has in their government.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was not just about border crossings, but to surveil the information in the healthcare system of that nation. And rather than wait until somebody's, traveling, identify something going on in the hospital system. Oh, there's an outbreak of this, there's an outbreak of that, there's an increase in something. And the IHR focal point is obligated to report that immediately to the WHO. And if it's determined that everybody else in the world should be concerned about it, the Director General can declare a public health emergency of international concern.
Right. I'm just going to bring this up while you talk.
There you go. There you go. You're spot on.
People can't see it. I know, but they can go to they can go here and they can see all the stuff you've put up. But what you can see here is this is the decision making chart, and there's a lot of, is this serious? Is it not? And it's so very subjective.
Yep.
And that's the thing. Any kind of panicky health organization could just hit the big red button, and then next thing you know, they're activating this pandemic treaty or this regulation.
Keep that on the screen for just a little bit.
Sure.
On the left box, on the top left, you see there's a straight arrow down. Okay.
Yeah.
So if any of those diseases are identified, boom, they're supposed to immediately report it.
Yes.
And so one of the changes that was made was, one of the things that was supposed to be immediately reported was wild type poliovirus. And in the amendments, they crossed out wild type because they're really not finding any wild type poliovirus very much anymore.
Right.
They're finding vaccine derived poliovirus.
Right.
And so what that actually was an admission that the solution to this purported problem is actually causing the problem. So now they're immediately, well, I should take that back. It won't technically go into effect for a year, but once the changes are in effect, now if they find some vaccine-derived poliovirus in a septic or sewage treatment plant somewhere, because it goes, the oral poliovirus will go right through people, end up mutating in the septic sewage systems of the world. Now it'll be reportable. They have to report it. And so if you're checking the septic and sewage treatment systems, generally, just basic plumbing, as they say in plumbing, SHIT flows downhill. So you can look through the system and go, well, it had to come from this area of the city. Maybe they implement lockdown and tell everybody, oh, you have to be afraid of poliovirus in this region.
Right.
So, one little change, crossing out the term wild type, could have an enormous impact on the fear-mongering potential for this decision-making instrument. Well, if you want to bring that down, because we're going to move on, what they have implemented now is prevention surveillance, not just surveilling, oh, people have come into the hospital and they are sick. Prevention surveillance is something like going into a poultry facility and looking for bird flu, in the bedding, in the poop, in the operation. Go look at the your pigs and goats and cows and everything else, looking through their excrement to see if they can find something to scare people with.
Right.
We just actually had in Canada here, Teresa Tam, our big health guru, just held a secret meeting that ended up being recorded because Christine Massey was invited by mistake. The wrong Christine Massey was invited by mistake, and she put it out there. And they said right in that meeting, they're going to run PCR tests until they find something, but they're now strategizing the message and the communication and what they're going to do province Canada wide.
Yeah.
So all the provinces are doing the same thing, but they're going to decide what they're going to do right now, and they're going to keep running PCR test cycling until they find something, to make sure that they find something so that they can go and euthanize birds. And what we just recently found out this weekend is in a very small rural community just a few minutes north of us, they've actually started, the Ministry of Agriculture is going around to any farm that has the little, free market eggs at the end of their driveway. And they're walking onto those places and taking their birds because, bird flu was found, within 7 kilometers of here. So we're just going to take your birds and euthanize them. And we know you have birds because you have eggs for sale at the end of your driveway. So they're not even waiting to make sure that the birds are clean or testing them. They're just taking them and euthanizing them because a bird was found 7 kilometers from here. One bird to have this. So this is what they're doing here in Canada right now.
I would just push back on one thing. You used a relatively nice word. They want to murder animals.
Correct.
Euthanize puts a little soft face on it. Well, if you recognize how animals' immune system function, if a cow comes into contact with some pathogen in the field that they're living, if they're giving milk, the milk will transmit antibodies to the pathogen that the mother cow is exposed to. Drinking that milk would actually give you some protection against those very pathogens. Many people don't know this, but there's IgY, immunoglobulin Y, in eggs that do pretty much the same thing. There's companies out there that expose chickens to various pathogens. Their eggs then include antibodies to those pathogens. Now, not that many people eat raw eggs, okay?
Right.
But the raw eggs can be dried, and then the powdered immunoglobulin. I had an experience 20 years ago. This is not new technology, where I used to manage a mom and pop herb and nutrition store. One of the customers had a dog that had a pseudomonas, I think was the infection. Gave them the powdered egg immunoglobulins, boom, fixed them right up. And so they're actually attacking Mother Nature's prevention. This is how just evil these people are.
Yes.
Moving on, in the amendments, this is the beginning of this, where they want to fund the build out of prevention surveillance. The very thing that you're talking about is what got adopted, buried in Annex 1 with just an insertion of one word. Surveillance used to mean, if somebody comes into the hospital, let the WHO know.
Yeah.
Now surveillance means go looking for problems that don't exist.
Exactly.
Correct.
I mean, the evil is apparently limitless. Okay.
Yeah, there's so much to go through with this IHR. I'm going to go back through it again because there's so much to miss. I picked out a couple things, and this was one that I kind of keyed into, and that's regardless of the format in which they have been issued, certificates must bear the name of the clinician supervising the administration, which they never used to have to do. And this is a way of verifying every vaccine passport because they had so many, false ones out there. So now you have to actually have the person who administered it as well as so they can verify it in person.
Further down on that particular page, I think is where they talked about guardians. Okay.
Yes.
The certificate. And you can read that and it sounds all nice and wonderful. But I had someone alert me a couple of months ago about problems that they had, not necessarily in regards to this, because this is mostly about international travel, but about elderly people who, when they find themselves in some kind of nursing home, they
Yes.
end up on a whole bunch of medications. They start to, run into trouble being aware of what's really going on. They're diagnosed as being incompetent, and governments will assign a guardian.
Yes.
Yes.
That makes massive problems for the family because control has been taken over.
Yes.
People need to have that sort of thing dealt with on a much more familial and personal basis. You get medical power of attorney or some such thing. But if you take that into international travel, if you're traveling and you don't have the paperwork that they say you want to have, and they require you to be injected or do some sort of prophylaxis or whatever, and you stand up and you refuse, they'll put you through a psychological evaluation, claim you are crazy and incompetent. Why wouldn't you want these vaccines? And potentially assign a guardian that could sign the paperwork as if you had given your consent.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Especially in Canada, because all of our legislation is talking about whether or not you're mentally stable. They can come into your home now just on an accusation and take your property and seize a bunch of stuff. But we also know of at least 7 cases in Canada where whistleblowers were institutionalized for their mental health to shut them up. So,
yeah,
it's
if you don't
not-
go with the narrative, you must be crazy. Okay.
Correct.
Exactly right. So this isn't dystopian future stuff. This stuff has been happening in Canada for quite a while now.
So, in regards to the amendments, the core problem that I see is that they set up this financing mechanism to build out industry around the world in nations that essentially can't afford the prices of big pharma for all of this high tech, equipment. What they learned over the last 4.5, 5 years is completely and totally different than what I'm guessing you learned and I learned, and probably most of your audience. The masks don't work, they actually cause problems.
Mhm.
The use of the PCR is just blatantly fraudulent.
Yeah.
Drugs like remdesivir, which I call run death is near, if something damages your kidneys and causes fluid to back up into your lungs, how is that a reasonable treatment for a respiratory problem?
Right.
Right? It's just a moneymaker. It's like $3,000 to $5,000 for a course of remdesivir, and I got myself a little bit in trouble back in 2022 when I noticed that the FDA authorized remdesivir for outpatient injectable use in children, but the children had to be at least 3.5 kilograms. My head exploded. I'm like, that's an infant.
Mm-hmm.
How they could approve remdesivir for outpatient injectable use in infants is disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this is what we're dealing with. AstraZeneca and J&J have been taken off the market, leaving Pfizer and Moderna, which anyone who's paying any attention should know by now that they're not vaccines.
Correct.
They don't impart immunity. They don't stop infection. They don't stop transmission. They were never tested to stop transmission. They cause, disease, disability, and death. But let me dive in a little bit deeper, because I think the vast majority of people have never really tried to visualize what I'm going to try to give you a picture of. I don't accept what they say at face value. I don't believe any of it. But
Mm-hmm.
just for sake of discussion, let's pretend that the story that is the official narrative is what we're talking about.
Right.
Their claim is that they have identified some pathogen and
Mhm.
they've extracted the spike protein genome and they've altered it, modified RNA using pseudouridine to make it so that it's more stable. So it's something that does not appear in nature.
Mhm.
They're using something that is modified RNA. They wrap it up in a lipid nanoparticle, which I understand, Canadian industry manufactures and earns a lot of money from
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
I call those lipids frankenlipids because they're not naturally occurring fats.
Mhm.
They're artificial and in and of themselves, they're toxic. So you take this toxic fatty bubble, you insert a modified genetic sequence into it, inject it into someone's arm and claim that it stays in the arm, but it's clearly understood that it certainly doesn't
Does not.
because they don't use the process of aspiration to ensure that they didn't hit a vein or an artery. They just stick in the needle and shove the plunger in.
Mhm.
So these fatty particles go everywhere in your body. They have an affinity for the membrane of cells in your liver, your kidneys, your adrenals, your nervous system, your brain, ovaries, and so forth. Deliver their payload by merging with the membrane of the cell of wherever they may end up. The mRNA, according to their theory, causes that cell to make this toxic protein. You just created a manufacturing plant for a toxic substance that
Yes.
doesn't exist in nature because it's been modified. But the original is like that's the killing part of the pathogen, according to their theory, so that cell puts up a little signal that says, hey, I've been infected, come and destroy me. And so
Mhm.
your immune system attacks you in the body tissues.
Right.
How in the world is generating an autoimmune disease in your tissues beneficial against a respiratory pathogen? None of that is going on inside your lungs. Those antibodies that are generated don't ever find their way into your lung. You don't need to look at any data to understand that that is just the most ridiculous
Right.
idea imaginable.
Right.
But did anybody ever tell anybody,
No.
before they got the jab, that this is our plan, that
No.
this is what this is going to do? Now, I don't really believe any of that for a minute. There's a whole heck of a lot of other garbage that is in these jabs.
Mhm.
I think every batch is a little bit different. So there's a much
Agreed.
more
Agreed.
complicated story going on here.
Mhm.
Agreed.
But that's the official story.
Yes.
And they want to build more manufacturing plants around the world because the platform has been accepted and they could, they feel that they can just put any modified RNA in there and pump it out because, oh, it's safe and effective.
Yes.
It's insane and evil.
Yeah, I mean, if you do the research that we do, you've got your hands full with just this. But we've gone back, we've read enough to believe that there is eugenics never died.
Mhm.
It's still going on. It's called transhumanism now, but there's a lot of that going on still. And if you read and compare all of the Pfizer contracts, you'll find that they're very different in each country, and a lot of them are saying yes, you can donate your extra product to other countries, and there's some countries where like nope, you can't accept it and you can't give
donate it.
This batch is for your country and your country only, and you can guess which countries those contracts apply to. But there becomes, when you look at the big picture and you take them, if you take one contract, it says one thing. When you take them all, it starts painting a picture of very specific testing and experimentation going on globally,
Which 100% meets the eugenics programming and acceleration of the human being. Because they say some of these things will be benefits and some of them won't.
Right.
So please report everything and then return everything within 30 days.
Mhm.
All the garbage, all the packaging must be returned within 30 days. And why would that be if it wasn't an experiment and they didn't want people to know
Sure.
what each batch contained?
Yeah. And you don't have to look farther than the genome projects that go on in every province, every state, every
Every
federal
country.
level. And guess who's involved with every single genome project? That'd be Bill and Melinda Gates, right?
Oh, it's a massive data collection
Exactly.
experiment on humanity under the guise, at least in the United States, of the way it was authorized. The actual language in the statute that was used to justify the EUA says, "Oh, this is not a clinical trial." You know? And so
Pfizer, Moderna, all over their website says this is a trial, this is an experiment, this is an investigation. So please, but this WHO agreement, the IHR amendments, point to exactly that. And as you said, preventative. We know in Newfoundland, I think it's Newfoundland or New Brunswick, one of our provinces, they just passed legislation saying all doctors must hand over all medical records of every patient to a third party. Who's that third party? Probably the IHR task force that has been put in every nation so that they can surveil preventatively to meet these obligations.
Right. And so many of the nations already have these programs in place, all of the stuff that you're mentioning. And so the argument has been the relatively poor nations did not want to be obligated to do that deep surveillance because that costs an enormous amount of money. So the battle has not been about whether or not any of this makes sense. The question has been, well, who the heck is going to pay for it? Right. Now, the other aspect of it was an expression of national sovereignty, because once they get a genetic sequence that has got profiteering potential, they wanted to make sure that they got rewarded for that. And so over on the other side of town in Geneva on Friday, May 24th, they had a signing ceremony for a WIPO treaty, the World Intellectual Property Organization treaty, that sort of seems to have settled that, where anyone applying for a patent has to name the source of the genetic sequence that might be used in the patent. So one of the reasons why I think people were celebrating prematurely was on that Friday, Tedros kind of gave this woe is me theatrical production. Oh, I'm so sad that we didn't get a chance to make an agreement and reach consensus. While across town, they were signing a treaty that broke open the logjam on the negotiations. That Sunday, on May 26th, Ashley Bloomfield, who was one of the co-chairs for the negotiations with the amendments, said in a very cocky way, well, there's these protesters coming to Geneva. We'll see who's going to be clanking champagne glasses and celebrating at the end of the week. On Tuesday, the 28th, when they were supposed to be talking about the amendments in the treaty, instead, they said, hey, look at what happened across town at WIPO. And they said, let's keep negotiating. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, on into Saturday, all the way up till 9:30 in the evening, they finally agreed to the amendments to the international health regulations. And they didn't manage to get the treaty finished, but they agreed to continue those negotiations. In the meeting the other day, different group said that they really want to get this done before the November election in the United States, because otherwise afterwards it's going to be much harder.
Right.
And so they're going to do everything they can to try to ram this through. And, unfortunately, a lot of people in the alternative media are going on hearsay. They're not sourcing, all the way deep, like you guys are digging down into the contracts. I'm pretty sure nobody would be able to bamboozle you about the details of what's in the Pfizer contracts because you've read them.
Yeah,
Exactly.
But if you presented information about them and then somebody reported on your report and then somebody reported on that report and then somebody gave commentary on the report of the report of the report,
yes,
it doesn't take more than one, level, and it gets messed up.
yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And so, basically what happened is analogous to if you've ever seen a football player running for a touchdown and they're on the 10-yard line and they start celebrating and they spike the ball or they get tackled or they fumble.
Yeah.
It ain't over till it's over, and it still
Mhm.
ain't over.
No.
Correct.
Now,
So where would you say the bite comes from? Because everybody's focusing on the WHO. They had that big rally in Geneva and everybody went and said, no more hoop. But I'm looking at legislation here in Canada and in the provinces where they're actually inserting legislation to say we're going to adopt all of these things. So they're preparing for this. Is the bite with the WHO, or is the bite with the government, or is the WHO propping up the government to put in, where's the power coming from in this?
yes, 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 and yes.
Perfect. And done. Good night, everybody.
And the problem is, I'll talk about a nation such as Canada that is considered to be a relatively high income country compared to other low income countries,
Right.
and most of the infrastructure is already in place.
Right.
They're already doing the surveillance. They already have the laws in place. They already have the manufacturing capability and the tests and the technology and all that sort of thing. So the difficulty in these negotiations is they want everyone in the world to be doing already what Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, Israel, the wealthy nations are already doing all this crazy stuff.
Mhm.
Right.
So to put requirements on poorer nations
Mhm.
to implement this high-tech surveillance capability, they were basically saying, where's the money? How are we going to afford this?
Mhm.
And that was really what the issue was, is they want access to the products and they wanted money to do the surveillance. And rather than just get, oh, okay, well, here's some vaccines that we made for you if you need them, they set up a financing mechanism to build out the industry in geographically distributed manner so that the oligarchs in poorer nations who want to get involved in profiting from getting involved with surveillance and manufacturing are now incentivized to do so. And so one other aspect of it that I think people, once you hear it, you understand it, but if you've never heard it, why would you? The dues or the assessed payments from nations to the WHO to become a member in their country club, because it's a club for countries,
Mhm.
is based on the size of the overall economy, their GDP.
Yeah.
Right.
So the United States pays the most, China pays the second most, other nations with large economies, the G7, the G20,
Mhm.
relevant, down to more poor nations. Some of the yearly dues are in the range of $5, $10, $20,000.
Yes.
So if your nation can become a member of this country club and spend a small amount of money to be a member and vote appropriately and go along with what they want, and your nation gets a 10, 20, $100 million contract for a factory to make big pharma products, that looks like a good investment. Oh,
Correct.
we pay a little bit, we play with the big boys, and we get rewarded with this manufacturing of products that harm people.
Mhm.
Well, you've got to suspend what you've come to know about the harm that is caused by these products and
Right.
look at it from the other side and go, yes, it causes a lot of harm, but it makes an awful lot of money too.
The economic growth outweighs the
Yes.
illnesses that come from the product.
Yep. And it's astonishing, but not a single word in anything I've read or anything I've heard, people in these meetings, speak, has called into question in any way the fact that masks don't work, the tests are bogus, the drugs are harmful, and the jabs don't work. Not to mention that we're talking about potentially an unknown pathogen that could be completely different than anything ever seen before. That is verboten. You're not allowed to speak about that in any way, shape, or form. That should be the discussion. The discussion right now should be like what the NCI, is doing, and maybe some other groups of, wait a minute,
Mhm.
the lockdowns, the social distancing, the restrictions on life and business, and the mandates for masks and drugs and jobs, those were all more damaging than beneficial.
Yes.
But nobody's discussing that at all. It's full steam ahead. What they learned was not that big pharma is the problem. They learned that big pharma was not big enough.
Right.
Right.
There's a cynical part of me that might go into maybe the conspiratorial end of things, and a part of me wonders if they shut down AstraZeneca and J&J to make it look like they had safety rails on the whole thing to kind of give more credence to Moderna and Pfizer at the time.
You think?
Yeah.
Look over this way
Right.
while we do this over here.
Yeah. Well, it also, to people who are not really digging into it, leaves one who is subject to being coerced in this way or manipulated in this way. Oh, well, those were bad, but these are good, right?
Exactly.
The mRNA platform, it's still standing.
Yes.
So, they haven't taken Pfizer and Moderna off the market. So that platform must be safe and effective. Just, put in a different mRNA for whatever, and don't bother testing it. It's all good.
Mhm.
And that's just obscene.
It is. I
Right.
mean, it just added to the long list of questions nobody asked, but going back to the economic stuff, most people don't know that the Canadian government touted that they were doing better than any other nation in the G7. Our GDP was so strong, but nobody really realized that the GDP, what added to the GDP was vaccine purchases, and vaccine administration added to the GDP. And so it made it look like it was really great, but it was a false prop, right?
But not
Well,
only that, now because our GDP is so great, now we're going to pay even more money to the WHO for our dues.
there you go. Involuntary contributions. Well, in the United States, you can certainly keep the economy looking however you want it to look if you just create, $5 to $10 trillion out of thin air, put
Mhm.
that on the debt side of the ledger. I could live a spectacular life if I took a whole bunch of credit cards and went deep into debt and just said, no, ignore that. I'm living large, right? Things are great. But the inflationary pressure of that eventually catches up to you. But
Correct.
then you're out of office, and that's the other guy's problem.
Right.
And you can't really come back from that because they're making the problem horrific. And so, to maybe try to summarize this, the local issues that really have an impact on your life, the mask mandates, the social distancing, the lockdowns, the vaccine requirements to live your life. You got to do what they tell you in order to go to work or school or church or travel or anything.
Mhm.
Those issues are primarily local. Okay?
Right.
The amendments are funding things that Canadian government's probably already doing in terms of looking for a problem that doesn't really exist so they
Right.
can scare you. There's implications for international travel. I don't know that we talked really much about that, but once you leave your nation, the rules in the international health regulations, it's not about the WHO mandating anything.
Mhm.
It's all of the nations agreeing
Yes.
that they can compel travelers to undergo examinations and prophylaxis and vaccines or isolate and quarantine them. And they've strengthened some of those articles 24 and 27, and I think Annex 4, to incorporate what I think is fascism.
Yes.
They would call it a public private partnership. They want the travel companies, they refer to them as conveyance operators,
Mhm.
to implement the nation's policy on board or when you're embarking or disembarking from your travel.
Yes.
That is, horrific That is an abuse of fundamental rights and freedoms under the guise of national sovereignty.
So there's something really important to point out there that I didn't know until I heard it from a border official. We asked, why can you violate somebody's rights like you do coming in to the United States? And they said, well, you've left your country. You have not entered our country. You're in the middle, and international rules apply at this point. And so there's a whole new ball game, and that is that sweet spot you're talking about, sweet spot.
I don't know about sweet, yeah, but I hear you.
Exactly.
No, it's
Right.
It's spectacular that you've actually had, that conversation. You now get it, okay?
Yes.
But that has been confused because back in November of 2022, the Indonesian health minister talked about that issue, and he told a couple of really good lies. He said, well, back when COVID started, we had to lock down the world.
Mm-hmm.
No, you didn't. He said, well, that hurt the economy. Well, it didn't hurt the big companies, but it did hurt the little moms and pop companies. Then he said, well, in the future, if you're properly jabbed or properly tested, then you can move around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hold on a minute. The
Mhm.
jabs are fraudulent and so are the tests. So what are you really doing?
Yes.
You're allowing people who are compliant and are willing to submit to their bodies being assaulted. It's really assault and battery.
Yes.
Mhm.
And you'll let those people have a little bit of freedom while
Mhm.
you're restricting the freedom of people who are standing up for their rights. That's
Yes.
what that's really all about.
Mhm.
But they knew that they couldn't get that to be done inside a country.
Mhm.
And we got to come up with a better name than Sweet Spot because it's the horror show, right?
Correct.
Yes.
You're traveling, you don't have the protections of a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights and Freedoms or any such thing. You're at the mercy of the nation wherever you may be traveling to. And the agreement amongst all the nations is you can abuse our people when they travel to your country, and we can abuse your people when they travel to our country,
Mhm.
while our southern border is wide open and people are coming and going, no big deal.
Yes.
Right.
It's designed to punish people who are trying to do things the right way
Yes.
and only reward compliance.
Exactly.
Correct.
There was a snippet in the IHR that I wish I had grabbed. We were, again, we were helping Todd and our friend do this
Mhm.
movie tour, but it talked a lot about wanting to assume not only the health regulations, but also supply chain and disembarking and travel. And they want the minutia of all of the problems that COVID created. We want control over now. And I wish I grabbed that and put it so we could put it up and show people. But
There's one that you cannot grab because it was one of the few amendments that I thought were good and it didn't make the cut. So
Mhm.
one of the nations had submitted a proposal to facilitate the repatriation of people who were traveling and wanted to get the heck out of wherever they were and come home.
Mhm.
Right.
And that did not get included in the amendments. And so essentially what you're pointing out is exactly what I've been saying. They learned that they had some manufacturing, distribution, and logistics problems.
Mhm.
Big pharma bumped into some trouble when they were trying to jab the world. They couldn't make enough fast enough.
Mhm.
They had trouble, transporting it and then, implementing it. And so this is addressing the concerns of big pharma, not the concerns of people. They're
Yes.
all in on the deal,
Yes.
including the 400 plus relevant stakeholders, all of the non-government organizations, the foundations, the civil society groups. There's one line in, I believe it's Article 44 BIS, paragraph 2, where I think it's letter E, where it says that donations are going to be directed to organizations and entities that help government meet these requirements. And so there's hundreds of these groups, But what comes to mind for me, and I don't mean to say that this is, cast in stone, but think about groups like Planned Parenthood or
Mhm.
Doctors Without Borders. What we're dealing with is this public-private partnership slash fascism where
Yes.
government bumps into trouble. They can't really get away with doing something. So they want the airline or the cruise line or Planned Parenthood or some other organization to do their dirty work for them,
Yes.
to absolve them of the crimes that would be if they did it directly. And that's why all of these organizations and nations were clamoring to reach this agreement.
Hmm.
Because if I called you up and said, hey, I met this billionaire and he's coming over for dinner and he said he was in a really generous mood, you probably ought to show up at the table. You might not know what crumbs he might drop out for you.
Right. Right.
Right.
That's why everybody wants these deals to go through. So they got the intellectual property treaty. Uh, the nations themselves are passing, like, what is it, Bill 36 in British Columbia, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Correct me
exactly.
if I'm wrong, but that's not really a bill anymore. That's actually enacted, and it
Correct.
is, right.
Yeah.
And so let's just make things more dystopian. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that's like pre-positioning um, material for a project you've got coming in the future. They
Right.
didn't need the WHO to say that they had to do these things. They're all ready and raring to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so the only piece of the puzzle, missing is they haven't defined what their financial mechanism is actually going to be. They started, or they said they will start an implementation committee.
Hmm.
Maybe they'll meet next year sometime, whenever they get around to it, to set the rules for the financing.
Hmm.
So, there's no audit trail. There's no criteria of where's the money coming from, where's it going to go, who's going to set the choices of what's important. We're talking crony capitalism to the nth degree. So
Yeah.
I've dubbed it the new OPEC. It's not the oil producing and exporting countries. It's the Organization of Pandemic Emergency Corporations.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a mafia, money laundering, just racketeering, build out this industry that harms people under
Hmm.
the guise of, oh, we're trying to stop the next pandemic while we're looking for it to bring it into a lab to make the products to treat something that isn't actually causing a problem.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
recirculating money back into their own pockets under the guise of taxpayers doing the right thing.
Hmm. Yeah, we can certainly help you fill out the money aspect of that. It's all going to be climate change related, and it's ridiculous. We've gone into it, but just staying on track because
Well, no, actually, let me go there, because
Oh.
aside from all of these international agreements,
Yeah.
Mhm.
their core thing that they do is called the General Program of Work, GPW 14. Like Soviet Russia used to have a 5-year plan, and China has like a 10-year plan. WHO has a 4-year plan.
Yes.
And if you read the General Program of Work, number one priority is diseases due to climate change. So
Yes.
you're spot on target.
Yeah, yeah, and I just this seems like an important thing to me, and I just wanted to bring this up. You brought up the no time to gamble, and what I want to highlight is a couple things. Number one, we've said for a while, when we're battling legislation, it's too late. All this stuff gets created in the think tanks, and the think tanks then create these false studies and false science, and then they create legislation from those things. So we really should have eyes on the think tank. And you did that in the Substack link that I've been posting here for the last few minutes. It's all there. And this is the No Time to Gamble basically report. The two things in there is where we're not prepared is political leadership and accountability. So they're saying we need to give more power to the politicians. The problem was that we gave too much power to the Ministry of Health, or your health departments. And we had a lawsuit, and they lost based on the fact that there was the politicians running the show. So that's going to be a pesky thing that they want to get rid of. And here's this think tank propping up the politicians, but we know that they were the reason that this mess happened. So
The independent panel was put together in early 2021. They published their initial report in May of 2021. And the lessons that they learned were not the lessons that we learned. They learned the lessons that Big Pharma learned. Okay.
Right.
They had distribution trouble, they had manufacturing capacity shortfalls. If you look at their report, you go, oh, was this written by Big Pharma or was this written by a group that was looking out for the health of people? The answer is pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I did a video back in March of 2022 that was a summary of their initial report. And essentially what they said was they wanted to have a framework convention, which
Right.
is a type of international agreement that should send shivers down your spine. I
Mhm.
should only have to say framework convention for climate change. How's that working out?
Mhm.
Right? You reach an agreement on a framework, and then you set up a totally new bureaucracy to
Mhm.
meet on a yearly or whatever often basis, and whatever they decide, you've accepted by default. It's kind of like signing a blank check or signing a contract where the other party at the last minute puts in a bunch of blank pieces of paper and says, "Ah, just sign it. We'll fill that out later."
Right.
Well, that's what's going on with climate change.
Yes.
They have the COP, Conference of the Parties. The last one I think was 28. Every year they get
Yes.
together. Bunch of bureaucrats have a party. They go to some fancy location, sit around for a week, decide the future of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and come up with the craziest ideas
Mm-hmm.
that nations are accepted already because they signed a blank framework.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
They said they would need $30 billion a year, up to
Mhm.
$100 billion in surge financing, and that they wanted to create a essentially leadership council,
Yes.
which looks like they're going to try to do that through the United Nations with the Pact for the Future.
Correct. In
threat
September.
threat management, right? Whatever it may be.
Mhm.
Because what is needed is a one-size-fits-all global solution to
Yes.
whatever the emergency might be. And so this group is now coming back with another report. I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to participate. I actually got to ask them a question. So I think I got a little intel out of them. I don't know if you watched the press conference. Watch the little press conference. It's only like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I didn't bust their chops. I asked them a question to see what their answer would be. And so I said, well, how do you think we should deal with all of the vaccine hesitancy and all of these anti-vax activists? So their response I thought was interesting.
Is that in the Your Opinion Matters one? I watched a bunch of videos.
No, it's on Wake the Fighters Up, WTFU.
Your latest one. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. We'll go back.
you can watch their meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's worth watching. I mean, it's disgusting. Okay. But then they had a little 10-minute press conference and not too many people were there. So I asked them a question. I thought it was it was entertaining for me. I hope other people find it to be intriguing. They think the problem is people who are calling out the fallacies about the masks and the tests and the drugs and the jabs that they don't work. And so we're the problem spreading misinformation
Yes.
about their toxic solution to a non-problem.
That's the rhetoric they're going with. And we learned that due to information you put out about the UN SDG summit, we actually followed your link, got signed up, went, but not only that, from your link, it led us to 28 other meetings that we were able to get into.
Awesome.
And that was courtesy of you. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Courtesy for you for taking the action. That's
But so we went, and that was the rhetoric in every meeting.
It was.
That we are the problem. How do they deal with us? How do they get rid of us? How do they squash our messages? How do they squash us from doing the research on them, basically? And because we didn't fall for the incentivization, how do they now force us
Mhm.
to comply. And we now know they're going to use the banks and then the corporations and the, ESGs and the DEIs and the climate change to
Mhm.
now force everybody to comply with their wish list and their regulations that don't get voted on because the
good.
framework got voted on.
Good on you for doing what you've been doing. And I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people in those meetings honestly believe
Yes.
their own propaganda.
Yeah,
They
they-
100%.
They
100%.
honestly believe that they are doing good for the world.
yes, they do. It's funny though, one of the main marketing companies for this climate change stuff is Futura. And we went to a bunch of their meetings, and we had just come from filming all of the motorcades and all of the cars that were running to let the motorcades through, and all the police that had been brought in around the world, and all the NGOs that flew in, and all the hotels that are. So we went to them and I said, has anybody ever calculated the carbon cost of doing these climate change summits, right? And she looked at me and she goes, yeah, I know, but Biden needs his security. And then she walked away, and that was it. Like they just don't want to get there in their brains, right?
The cost just of these negotiations for the WHO, someone who contacted me from Australia did a FOIA request and found that for just one trip back and forth from Australia to Geneva for 2 delegates, and many of these nations send far more than that,
Yes.
for just one of the many, 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 many meetings that they had was $47,000. And so, I mean, it's not cheap to fly. It's not cheap to have a hotel in Geneva, so forth and so on. And so, it's government, so the money just flows.
Yeah.
But, multiply that times 194 nations times 20 or so meetings that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And, did any of that improve anyone's health at
No.
all?
No.
And, when I was watching the meeting as well, and the WHO meetings are tiny compared to the climate change meetings, right? In terms
Right.
of number of people. Yeah, I would look at it and go, well, they all had to come in from somewhere.
Yeah.
And, the carbon footprint. But one of the issues under their top issue is that healthcare as an industry creates 5% of the carbon output of the world. And they want to get, medicine to be carbon neutral. It's like the
Canada's
hypocrisy is
I know. Canada's way ahead on that because they'll just kill you. Period.
Ah.
They'll find an excuse. But you know how they're going to do it? We've been looking at the carbon tax here, and the government keeps saying we don't make any money off this carbon tax. And you're like, well, why would you do it then? And if you read Mark Carney's book Values, he kind of goes into it. And basically, if they put a carbon cost out there, so this is the cost, they're attaching a cost to tonnage of carbon.
Mhm.
Once they do that, there's an actual value for this green energy, which has no value. So now they can convince not only the banks and insurance companies and the investment firms that there's value there, but then they can start assessing the risk if they don't invest in these things, because they're not moving because they don't want to move off oil and gas. Rightfully so, because there's no money in it.
Mhm.
Right. So that's how they do it. The carbon tax is really just to attach value to this carbon, and then therefore they can create this false value out of air so they can tax air. Right.
Much
Oh,
like money.
it's a glorious, ingenious scam that, bless you for taking the time. I recognize that I'm blessed to have the time to dig into this. Most people are unfortunately, just trying to get by. And
Exactly.
you work all day long, you come home. I worked all my life, and you're exhausted and you just don't have time. So people turn on the TV, they get more propaganda. If they get sick, they go to their doctor, they get more propaganda. At some point, you realize that you're just being lied to continuously.
Yeah.
And when you go looking, and once you pull up the rug and you see what's all been swept under it, it's overwhelming.
Yes.
But the word, there's one word that I think people need to adopt as a good word, and that is disillusioned.
Mm.
A lot
Mhm.
of times people get depressed when they learn the truth
Yes.
Yes.
because, oh, I thought it was this, but now if you've been disillusioned, it means you're no longer living a lie. You
Mhm.
should actually be happy when your illusions are shattered.
Yes, exactly right. So, you know, you're also blessed because you're very independently wealthy, obviously, because you do all this. I see.
My,
so
my running
okay.
my running joke is I am doing spectacularly well because all my friends are deep in debt. I'm just broke.
Yeah. So,
Oh, you're doing as well as us.
There you go.
Fantastic.
yeah, never get into this for a living. So that's, we keep saying to people, like, either get on the front lines and fight. If you believe you're in a war, get on the front lines and fight. If you're not, fund those people who are. So we're gonna say, how do we fund you, James, to keep this going? Because you're one of the hardest workers in all of this stuff.
I don't even really go there. You know, there's a donate button on the bottom of the Substack. But
Okay.
the point is, and I think I talked about this earlier. I think I mentioned it. This video is a global public good. So if anybody watching this wants to do anything, share this video like you've never shared anything in your life. Now,
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean you take the link and you post it on Facebook and you go, I shared it. Okay. I had a conversation with another group of people in Canada, and one of the gentlemen said something that I've been saying for quite some time. So if you really want to help yourself in this fashion. Spend a little bit of money and go buy a brand new address book, a physical paper address book, and get the contact information of the people who get it.
Good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you might only put 2 or 3 names in there to start.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever go to an event where there are like-minded people and you're talking to anybody, if you strike up a conversation and it seems like they at least get some aspect of what's going on, hand them your address book and ask them to put their contact information in there. Have
Good
a
idea.
business card so you can give them your contact information.
Good idea.
If you really want to help, get better connected so that you personally feel stronger. You feel you got a whole address book of people who would have your back.
Mm-hmm.
Now that expands into, do you have a handyman or a plumber or a mechanic or a barber or somebody that gets it, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, promote their business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have not a medical doctor, but an acupuncturist, a chiropractor, an herbalist, a nutritionist, a Reiki practitioner, anything under the sun? If you don't have those connections to people who are still able to think, you need to make those connections.
Agreed.
And so one of the ideas that I've worked on, people can go to thecompleteguidetohealth.com. It's a real simple idea of, if you just keep going back to the doctor and ending up at the pharmacy to treat your health problems, you are part of the problem. If you start optimizing your health, go in for a tune-up, go to a chiropractor and get adjusted before your back goes out.
Right.
Okay. Go to an herbalist and get something to enhance your, chi or your energy and your balance before you crash and burn. Okay. You should have a little black book or, an address book that's overflowing to the point where you need another one. And at that point, you have become an influencer. You have contacts. If you send an email or a phone message or whatever to all those people, you're going to have an impact. Everyone is walking around feeling like they're the only ones. They go to these rallies, they go to these meetings, they go to a protest march, and then they go home and they didn't make any connections. Get an address book, and if you run into somebody that you think you want to be better friends with, get connected.
Awesome. That's good advice. So, James, well, I mean, it's hard to get. You're so involved in not only researching but also getting out there and sharing the word with all these different talk shows, and we just are always super happy to have a little bit of your time, and we love having you on the show.
And one last thing, I always give my phone number.
Good.
So
Yeah.
my phone number is 310-619-3055. I'm in California, 310-619-3055. If you have any questions, because the details on this are crazy, but that was quick. But really, stand up for what you believe in. If you're silent, then it's viewed as consent. If you look at any of this, most everybody has one of these. Okay. But you might also have one of these. You can invite yourself to a free Zoom meeting and record yourself, and now you've got a video that you can put out on the internet.
Yes, please do.
Anybody can do that for free. It's really not hard. Whatever your opinion is, base it in fact. Make sure you got your facts as straight as you can.
Yes.
Speak up.
Right. And don't take other people's facts. Like, do your own research. And, at this point, don't trust anyone. Don't trust us. Don't trust you. Go and verify for yourself.
Exactly.
Go to the source. And that's what I love about you. So few people are doing that. They're just repeating what they hear.
Yep.
And you're doing it. We're doing it. And we really appreciate all the effort you're doing.
Right back at you. Thanks for all you're doing.
James, thanks for coming
James.
on the show. And we wish you the best of luck. And we will absolutely want to check in with you later and see how things are going. So
Thanks.
hope you'll come back.
Anytime.
Okay.
Thank you, James.
Bye-bye.